All right, now in VS Code, let's add a new file, index.js. We could also call it app.js. It doesn't really matter. So in this file, first we want to load the Express module. So we use our require function, give it the name of our module, which is Express. Now this returns a function. We call that Express. Okay? Now we need to call this function like this. And as you can see, this returns an object of type Express. By convention, we call this object app. So we store the result in a constant called app. So this represents our application. Now this app object has a bunch of useful methods. We have methods like get, post, put, and delete. All these methods correspond to HTTP verbs or HTTP methods that I told you about earlier in this section. So if you want to handle an HTTP post request to an endpoint, you would use app.post. Now in this lecture, we just want to use app.get. We want to implement a couple of endpoints that respond to an HTTP GET request. So this method takes two arguments. The first argument is the path or the URL. So here I'm going to use slash to represent the root of the website. Now the second argument is a callback function. This is the function that will be called when we have an HTTP GET request to this endpoint. Okay? So this callback function should have two arguments, request and response. So this goes to a code block. Now this request object has a bunch of useful properties that gives us information about the incoming request. If you want to learn about all these properties, it's best to look at the Express documentation because in this course, we're going to use only a handful of these properties. So head over to expressjs.com. On the top, look at the API reference, version 4. Now here you can see the request object. And below that, you can see all the properties that are available to you. We have base URL, we have body to read the body of the request, cookies, fresh, hostname, IP, method, original URL, parameters, and so on. So back to our code. When we get an HTTP GET request to the root of our website, we're going to respond with a hello world message. So response.send hello world. So this is how we define a route. We specify the path or the URL and a callback function, which is also called a route handler. Now, finally, we need to listen on a given port. So we call app.listen. We give it a port number like 3000. And optionally, we can pass a function that will be called when the application starts listening on the given port. So once again, we use the arrow function syntax to display something on the console. So console.log listening on port 3000. Now back in the terminal, node index.js. Okay, we're listening on port 3000. Now let's switch over to Chrome and go to localhost port 3000. So here's our hello world message. Now let's define another route. So once again, we're going to call app.get. Now this one is going to be /API/courses. Once again, we pass a function with two arguments, that is request and response. And this goes to a code block. Now in the real world scenario, here we want to get the list of courses from the database and return them. But as I told you before, in this section, our focus is purely on building these endpoints. We're not going to do any database work. So I'm going to simply return an array of numbers. So response.send, we pass an array of 3 numbers. In the future, we can replace these numbers with actual course objects. So save. Now back in the terminal, we have to stop this process and start it again. So press Ctrl and C, Okay, one more time, node index.js. Now, back in Chrome, let's head over to /API/courses. Look, we have an array of 3 numbers. Beautiful. So this is what I want you to pay attention to here. In this implementation, we don't have those if blocks. We define new routes by calling app.get. And with this structure, as our application grows, we can move some of these routes to different files. For example, we can move all the routes related to courses to a separate file like courses.js. So Express gives our application a skeleton, a structure.